With the Newcastle Street Circuit finally coming back on the calendar after 3 years off, and as the opening round, I thought it would be a good time to talk about what is widely considered one of the most controversial championship wins in recent history. Now naturally this video will contain a multitude of spoilers, so if you've not seen the 2017 championship finale and you want to, just stop here. The year was 2017. It was actually the first event held at the Newcastle Street Circuit back when it was the season finale. Coming into this round, Jamie Whincup held the lead of the championship by just 30 points over Scott McLaughlin. Another 3 drivers went into the last round with a mathematical chance of winning. They were Coulthard, Mostert and Van Gisbergen, but it was always going to be just a 2-horse race between Whincup and McLaughlin. The penultimate race had Whincup in position 5 and McLaughlin on pole position. By turn 4 though, Whincup was scraping along the concrete wall down the Esplanade after contact with the Nissan of Michael Caruso at turn 2. This resulted in steering and suspension damage to the front right side of his Holden Commodore. And just a little whoopsie with these 4 at turn 8. After a lengthy time in the pit lane, Whincup rejoined the race and eventually finished 21st, 13 laps down and the last of the finishing drivers. McLaughlin, on the other hand, finished first, putting him in the championship lead with 1 race to go. Now if you don't know the story of this controversial championship win, you're probably wondering which part of that was controversial. Don't worry, it's coming. The next day's qualifying and shootout resulted in McLaughlin starting from pole position again. Scott was required to finish just 11th or higher to be guaranteed the championship. Sounds easy, right? Well, this is where the controversy really starts. On lap 8, Scott's teammate in the number 12, Fabian Coulthard, comes to pit lane for his first compulsory pit stop. Upon leaving the pit lane, he is given a pit lane penalty for allegedly speeding in pit lane. 8 laps later, Scott McLaughlin enters the pit lane, followed closely by the 97 Shane Van Gisbergen. Again, upon exiting the lane, McLaughlin was also deemed to have been speeding in pit lane and was also issued with a penalty. And while a pit speed violation is not necessarily uncommon, the circumstances around it were unusual, and I'll get to that in a moment. Following his charge through the field in what was regarded as a very difficult circuit to pass on, Scotty made a boo-boo. Heading up Watt Street on lap 46 and into turn 2, Scott made contact with the left rear of Simona Di Silvestro's Nissan, spinning her around. Side note, Simona was MVP that weekend, being pretty much the only driver to complete multiple successful passes at turn 8. The contact ultimately and unsurprisingly resulted in a second penalty. After a number of yellow flag interventions, Scott was in position 13 with just 22 laps remaining. On the final safety car restart, there was a wild moment with the 2 JRM Commodores and the Nissan of Todd Kelly. The moment resulted in Scott being delayed into turn 1, with the other Scott, Scott Pye, diving down the inside. The further delay for McLaughlin caused contact with the retiring Jason Bright, launching Brighty into the air before crashing back to the circuit. The resulting damage to Scott's car caused significant tyre smoke for a number of laps, but somehow there was no significant damage to either car and they were both able to continue. Into the hairpin on lap 92, Scott took a dive and passed James. Finally, with 3 laps remaining, Scott was in the position he needed to be in to win the championship. Scott had the most race wins and most poles in the season and was about to wrap up... Oh, hold on. Hang on. That's, Ooh. Yeah, that's not ideal, is it? That's, Oh, yikes. So Whincup won the race. Scott was in position 11, where he needed to be to win the championship. However, just seconds before Scott crossed the line, he was given a 25-second penalty, obviously dropping him down the order to position 18. Naturally, this resulted in Whincup winning his historic 7th championship. So that's the story of one of the most controversial championship wins in recent history. Wait, there's still like 5 minutes left of the video. Well, there is more to this story. Shell V-Power Racing disputed the penalty. However, it was later revealed that they did not have the right to dispute the penalty, as penalties applied during the race were unable to be appealed. The fact the penalty was applied so quickly, within the space of 2 laps, was a highly contentious topic, especially considering how significant the impact would have on the championship. Understandably, delaying the result of the championship would not be ideal, but in these circumstances, surely spending the extra time to review all information would be an acceptable reason for the delay. That was just one reason why the outcome was so controversial. Rewinding to lap 46 when Scott spun Simona, that penalty completely warranted. There is no disputing that. However, should Scott have ever been that far down the order where he was in a position to be caught up in an incident like that? Well, a lot of people say no. And why is that? Well, if you recall back on lap 14, Scott was penalised for speeding in pit lane. Shell V-Power Racing were adamant that Scott was not speeding. So much so that they eventually released the team's telemetry, seemingly proving his innocence. The telemetry shows the car travelling at 33 km an hour when he slows to enter the lane. The car then increases to 38.5 km an hour, at no point reaching nor exceeding the 40 km an hour speed limit. While a review between Supercars and DJR Team Penske did occur after the event, no resolution was reached as neither party could agree on the speed. Another reason why this was so controversial is that a number of other drivers were penalised over the weekend for speeding in pit lane, which, that's a rare occurrence. Was the equipment faulty? Perhaps. Another, slightly less probable reason is that because Scott was already well ahead of his target finishing position, given he was in first at the time, penalising him would make the race more interesting, forcing him to fight his way back to where he needed to be. Obviously they didn't count for him being penalised 2 more times. So in the end, Scott lost by a mere 21 points. And this is where yet another controversial aspect arises. There were multiple times throughout the season where things either fell Whincup's way or they did not fall McLaughlin's way. And all but one of them were out of the realm of any interference. If we go back right to the beginning of the season, the very first race, Whincup made contact with Winterbottom, spinning him around. It was deemed that no driver was wholly or predominantly to blame. However, it's pretty widely agreed that he should have been penalised. Then, race 9 at Phillip Island saw 9 drivers penalised for crossing the white line at entry to the pit lane, including Scott McLaughlin. There were a few drivers who crossed the white line but weren't penalised, and one of those was Jamie Whincup. So we don't know where he would have finished had he received even one of those potential penalties, but it's also almost certain he would have probably lost more than 21 points. Another instance was later in the season, at Sydney Motorsport Park. Scott was leading after a safety car restart where Whincup's teammate, Shane van Gisbergen, bumped him down the straight before passing him into turn 1. Scott retaliated and bumped him through turn 2, spinning him out and causing significant damage to a number of cars, including David Reynolds and Jamie Whincup. This one was a double whammy, in more ways than one. Scott was penalised mid-race with a time penalty. He was then penalised a second time after a post-race investigation for the same incident, dropping him even further down the order. Whincup, who had significant frontal damage with panels hanging off and waving in the wind, was not penalised for loose bodywork. Now, we have all seen drivers penalised for significantly less damage, and even at times panels that had already fallen off the car. So a double penalty for Scott and none for Whincup. And one final scenario that heavily impacted the championship occurred at Bathurst. Coincidentally, both Whincup and McLaughlin suffered the same engine dramas during the race. The teams both handled them differently though. DJR Team Penske tried to push through until the car eventually failed going into cutting. Red Bull Racing, on the other hand, brought the 88 into the pits and worked on it, eventually repairing it with enough laps remaining to classify as a finisher, and as such, collect approximately 60 points. Had the 17 done the same, they may have had enough points to win the championship. But we'll never know. What we do know is that there were a lot of situations that fell the way of the 88, whether deserved or not. It is important to remember that these situations happen to every championship winner, every year. Perhaps not to the same extent, but there has never been a championship winner who has never had any of those "but what if" moments throughout their season. And I'm not saying that the 2017 season was predetermined, nor that the finale was, dare I say, rigged. You can come to whatever conclusion you'd like. What I will say is the final race of the 2017 championship will go down as one of the most controversial in the Supercars modern era. So what do you think? Was this championship win contrived? Was it a coincidence? Was Whincup the deserved winner?